I think Capone Gang Bege is going to be one of the more important supernovas outside of Luffy, Zoro, and Bonnie, and I think he's going to join the Straw Hat Grand Fleet in the future. I do not think he's going to join Cross Guild. I think a lot of characters are going to join Cross Guild, but he is not one of them because I think based on what happens after his cover story, his crew has skyrocketed in importance because his crew now, outside of the Straw Hats, has the most named important characters that we have seen outside of, like, say, antagonist crews or, well, yeah, the Straw Hats themselves. Because, okay, the first time chronologically we get some importance of how big Capone Gang Bege is going to be is actually in the time skip in Wano, because in the flashback where Ace is fighting Yamato and they eventually have a drink together, Ace mentions the important people, the super rookies that are coming up in the world currently. He mentions Kid to the south and Law to the north. I do think Kid and Law are going to be somewhat important just based on the events of the narrative, but I don't think they're going to have any involvement with Luffy moving forward. I think it's going to be somebody else, but we'll talk about that in another video. So, as far as the West goes, he does mention Capone Gang Bege. So it's weird that even from that point, Bege was an important figure coming from the West. And I just think that's a weirdly big thing. So, after that, another weird thing that happens to him, and I just want to point this out because this could lead into yet another video that we can talk about more in depth later. But when the time skip is starting, and this is very specific, but in chapter 594, the Fire Tank Pirates have their whole ship abducted by a mysterious floating craft. I think Shiki could have been behind that, and we'll get into more detail about that in another video, but it is weird that Shiki, as he's presented in the film Strong World, is very organized, crime coded, very Yakuza coded in his representation in that movie, much like how Capone Gang Bege is very Italian mafia coded in the series of One Piece proper. But what's also interesting about this is that the Straw Hats dress up like gangsters to confront Shiki in the film, and they dress up like gangsters to have a sit down with Capone in the Whole Cake Island arc. So I find it very interesting that the two have some very odd overlay with one another. Will that mean anything in the future? I don't know, but it's just something I wanted to point out. Now, when discussing the Fire Tank Pirates, based on the events of the time skip and further on with the Gang Bege's Oh My Family cover story, which is one of the longest cover stories in One Piece, Bege has a weirdly large crew that you really don't get to see that much of when you're talking about supernovas in general, because a lot of them with other named characters in their crew either don't get that much screen time or are ultimately unimportant. And there's a weird paradox now with the Fire Tank Pirates because, okay, at the top, you have Capone Bege, then you have Vito, then you have Gotti. Following them, you have Charlotte Chiffon, Bege's wife, and then their son, Capone Pez, followed by now, in the addition of the Rolling Pirates, you have Charlotte Lola, the twin sister of Charlotte Chiffon, and then the Risky Brothers, who are the paradox in this situation because they aren't named individually. They're just called the Risky Brothers collectively, yet they assist with the events of collecting the shadows on Thriller Bark, and they saw Zoro sacrifice himself for Luffy when confronted with Bartholomew Kuma. So they are weirdly important in the events of Thriller Bark, yet they are unnamed, which is why I call them a paradox, because that doesn't really happen that often. So that's weird. But following them, you have the father of Chiffon and Lola, who is called Pound. And Pound, of course, was important in the events of Whole Cake Island. So it's weird that he has so many named characters on his crew, and you don't get to see that with a lot of Supernova crews. Because when you talk about, like, say, Law or Kid, even though they have named characters on their crews who have importance, that importance hasn't really been fleshed out in any meaningful way in the narrative, as they aren't really a part of that many events in the story. The only guys who get this sort of accolade, I would say, on both of their crews are the first hands, basically, Killer and Beppo. Everybody else is kind of left out to dry, which is a shame, but it is what it is. But when you look at the Fire Tank Pirates, that's not the case. All of them get a weird amount of characterization, and Gotti might as well be the second most important character in the cover story. So it's weird that that has happened, which is why I think in the future it's very possible for the Fire Tank Pirates to be another ship in the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, because no other Supernova crew has been treated in this way. And it's a bit of a shell shock because you're just not expecting that based on the initial introduction of Capone in Sabaody Archipelago. But what I do find funny about that now is that both those two characters in that scene are most likely going to be the most important characters when it comes to the Straw Hats and the larger organization of the Grand Fleet, because most likely Jury Bonnie herself is going to become a Straw Hat, and then the Fire Tank Pirates under Capone Gang Bege are going to be a part of the Grand Fleet. So I find it very funny that Bonnie and Bege were introduced together. And it's also funny that both their names start with B. That's quite funny. But I want you to become a part of my outfit by clicking that subscribe button, followed by the like button, and if you can find it, ring that bell so you never miss a Poly P Works video. And in addition, if you can, please hit the hype button. It helps out somehow. But to continue. But in addition to that, what I also find funny is that they're always characterized to have beef with one another for no reason at all, because in the film Stampede, Bonnie is shown de-aging a lot of Capone's guys. So I find it funny that they're constantly at odds with one another. But what's also funny on top of that is Bonnie's favorite food is pizza. Pizza is inherently Italian. Capone is characterized as an Italian gangster. So that's funny too within itself. But in addition, he's always having a weird relationship with pink-haired women. And I find that odd too, because, okay, he has beef with Bonnie upon his initial introduction in Sabaody Archipelago. Followed by that, he marries a pink-haired woman in Charlotte Chiffon, has a pink-haired son in Capone Pez. His sister-in-law is a pink-haired woman in Charlotte Lola. Their mother is Charlotte Linlin, otherwise known as Big Mom, a pink-haired woman. And their father is Pound, a pink-haired man. So I just find that weirdly interesting too. Does that mean anything? Probably not, but it is funny. But to continue, moving forward, I do think both Capone and Bonnie are going to be a part of the Straw Hats, presumably. Bonnie joining the main crew, and the Fire Tank Pirates as a whole being a part of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. In addition to this as well, it's quite interesting just how detailed their powers are. And you don't really think that's going to happen, but it does. The Age fruit has nearly unlimited impossibilities, and then the Castle fruit makes Capone into a weird golem Zoan type thing with a indeterminate amount of internal space, in addition to having some weird size altering ability with the weird shielding around his body, which I just find super interesting. And you never expect his ability to be as cool as it is, but it turns out it is, and it just surprises you. So I can't wait to see what develops for Capone gang Bege in the future, and he's one of my favorite supernovas, more so than even Law and Kid. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?